The flop. It makes or breaks your hand. The next two shows are dedicated to the strategy behind evaluating that flop and the strength of your hand and making the right moves.
I'm all in.
You see, there's more to poker than aces and races. There's concentration behind those poker faces. Yeah, enough of the poetry. Roll the VT!
There's no right or wrong way to play poker. There's not one method that will guarantee success, but there are ways and means for you to maximize your chances of winning. There are good habits and bad habits. There are situations to avoid and situations to seek. And there are those who have the knowledge to exploit them. We're going to teach you how to master the game, from the basics to the advanced.
In our last show, we examined our opponents and the methods we can all use to gather information. Today, we study our own game and what to do when you make a hand. As everybody knows, it's not what you've got, it's what you do with it that counts, and this show is all about how you exploit the hands that you've been dealt, from recognizing its strength to maximizing your winnings. The show takes in poker from all over the planet, but today, we're off to Vegas to feature some action from the North American Poker Tour. And then it's over to Dublin for a hand from the European Poker Tour. Our tutorials will help you evaluate the flop and coach you on how to play the nuts. 3 pearls of wisdom from Luca Pagano, the man with the most European Poker Tour cashes, Bertrand Grospellier, aka Elky, one of the hottest poker talents around, and Alex Kravchenko, winner of over $3.5 million in live tournaments. All that plus 2 pieces of analysis from Daniel Negreanu, arguably the best out there. Plenty to come then, and we start with your tutorial, evaluating the flop.
The flop is a turning point in any hand. Your whole cards can turn into the absolute nuts or garbage. However, most of the time you'll be somewhere between those two extremes. What we present to you here is a simple system for you to measure the strength of your hand and take the appropriate action. Here are the 4 categories. Note that these categories refer to made hands only. We'll talk about draws in the next show. The first category is very strong hands. Flushes, straights, sets, 2 pair or better basically. For example, here you flop a spade flush, which is definitely a very strong hand. Here you have top 2 pair, another very strong hand. Here the player has flopped a full house, again a very strong hand.
Oh my goodness, what a flop for Gustafsson.
When you flop a very strong hand, you're ahead in the vast majority of cases. Usually, you should play aggressively and very rarely fold. Once in a while, a slow play is in order, but more on that later in the show. The next category is strong hands. A strong hand consists of over pairs. That's a pocket pair which is higher than any of the community cards. And top pair, top kicker. Top kicker usually means an ace. If you're holding a pair of aces, the top kicker would be a king. With a strong hand, you're ahead most of the time. You're just not quite as certain as with a very strong hand. Therefore, aggressive play is still in order, but be more careful. If the stacks are large and you are facing a big raise, a fold is usually appropriate. The third category is mediocre hand. Any pair other than top pair is considered a mediocre hand. What to do with it heavily depends on your exact holding, the number of opponents, and the community cards. Let's consider 2 examples. Example 1. In the first example, you are holding top pair with the second best kicker. It's almost a strong hand, and you have only 1 opponent. You will be ahead most of the time, and aggressive play is justified. Example 2. In this example, your hand is pretty much worthless. You're up against 2 opponents, and you are holding an under pair to the board. An ace has flopped, which makes it even more likely that someone is paired up. Just check and fold this one. Don't throw away any good money after bad flops. The fourth category is trash. To flop trash is to make no pair or draw on the flop. If this happens, you have almost no hope to win the hand at the showdown. Bluffing once in a while is a good idea, but usually you should just fold.
So to recap then, we're suggesting a simple category system to measure the strength of your hand after the flop has been dealt. Is your hand very strong, strong, mediocre, or trash? If it's strong or very strong, play it aggressively. If it's mediocre, take care, especially if there are multiple opponents. And if it's trash, well, fold it. It's perhaps hardest to play a mediocre hand that's any pair other than top pair. But how do you know what to do with these kind of hands? Well, let's look into the vault for an example.
In this hand from Dublin in EPT Season 2, we can see that the Swede Henrik Olander has made a pre-flop raise with ace-jack, and the young English player David Pomeroy has decided to disguise his pair of kings by just making the call. The flop comes 5, queen, ace, and Pomeroy checks. Olander has made top pair and makes a bet of 40,000 chips, leaving Pomeroy with a tough decision. He has a strong pair, but not the top pair on the board. If he chooses to call, he is likely to lose a lot of chips. Instead, he weighs up the evidence. Olander raised before the flop and has shown strength by betting after the flop. This correctly leads Pomeroy to believe he is behind to a pair of aces, and he makes a good fold. When you are left with a mediocre hand after the flop, you will often have to make tough decisions. It's important to use all the information available to you to help you get them right.
Thanks, Christian. We'll bear that in mind. And if you want to learn more about poker, then go to PokerStars.com.
I think it's time we covered a bit more poker lingo.
I'm all in.
On the flush draw.
It's at least a flip, right?
I run better than that.
You have to steal the odd time. No sweat.
Here's a few more terms. Chop. No kung fu skills here. A chop pot is another name for a split pot, where both players have the same hand and take half the chips each.
It's going to be a split pot.
Dominate. One player's hand dominates another's when both of them hold one matching card, but their second card is different. The player with lower unmatching card finds themselves dominated. Rainbow. If there are no two community cards with the same suit, it's a rainbow board. And therefore, a rainbow flop is a flop with 3 different suits on. Simple as that.
Okay, this is level 2 show 5, and we're looking at the power of the flop, people. Don't you just love it when you flop a monster? Question is, what do you do next?
When you have a strong made hand, you don't really have to worry about being behind.
Tray 6-7, Doyle flops a set.
What you do have to worry about is draws. Here's a typical situation with a very strong made hand. Here you have 2 pair and there are 2 opponents who have checked to you. It's almost certain that you're ahead. There are some very good reasons to bet now. 1. There are lots of potential draws that might hit on the turn or river. Any spade could make someone a flush. Someone could also hit a straight with any 10, 9, 8, 5, 4, or 3. And a 7 can make them 3 of a kind, or would counterfeit your 2 pair as any ace with a better kicker would have you beat. 2. Action-killing cards may arrive. Even if none of those scare cards hits, they can still hurt you to allow your opponent to see another card. If they have a pocket pair, for example, and another overcard to that pair comes, it's doubtful that they'll stay in the hand if you bet now, which gives you another reason why you should have bet on the flop. 3. Poker is about winning chips. You need to build the pot over all streets to get it really large. You can make much bigger bets on the turn and river if you increase the pot size by betting the flop. So now that you know that you should bet, the next question is how much to bet. Let's go back to the top of the hand. Here the total pot is $22. The stacks are about $200 each, so there's a lot of money left to be won. Your aim is to win your opponent's entire stack, so bet big, about the size of the pot. The big blind folds and the other opponent calls, so the overall pot is now $62. The turn card is the deuce of clubs, not a scare card. The opponent checks to you, and you're in the same situation as you were on the flop, so you bet big again. $50 is about right. Your opponent calls. And here you go again. The river card didn't change much, and your opponent checks. so you should bet again because you're most likely ahead and might get paid off. Your stacks are smaller than the size of the pot, so you might as well put them all in. Your opponent thinks for a while and then calls. He shows ace-queen and your two-pair wins. He made a somewhat loose call, but your aggressive play forced him to make a decision, and he made the wrong choice.
Recap. The basic plan when flopping a very strong hand is the same in most cases. Be very aggressive and bet or raise on every street. If the stacks are large, you should bet big most of the time, usually between 3/4 of the pot and the full pot. If the stacks are small, it's okay to bet less. There are some situations that call for a slow play, but we'll talk about that in the next tutorial.
Time for Daniel Negreanu to analyze a hand for us, which today comes from the Ukraine and shows us why it's important to protect your made hand from developing draws.
Now, we spend a lot of time talking about hands that are difficult to play because you don't have the nuts. But what happens when you have a really, really strong hand and you're bet into? In this hand from the EPT Kiev, we're going to see a really interesting spot where we've got the nuts versus a set, but on the way there were some interesting things that happened on the flop. Let's just take a look. So with 2 7s here, Dovzhenko going to raise. It's pretty standard. Now for Tent, who's got King Jack of diamonds in the blind, he's got a few more chips and he wants to see a flop. Wow, so here's an interesting flop. As you see, Dovzhenko's flopped a set of 7s, and Tent, he just has a gut shot. You know, he needs a 10. He's got no backdoor diamond draw, so he really doesn't have a lot. But as you see, he's going to get a little tricky here. All right, now, when a player leads out in this spot, it's because they don't think their opponent has an ace maybe, or they're trying to represent one. Like he called out of the small blind, he could easily have something like ace-queen or something along those lines. Now, if I'm Dovzhenko, I'm thinking, okay, this guy's either got a draw or he's got, you know, a big ace or something like that, and I can get it in with the 3 7. So I want to raise in the flop. You want to get the money in before the board gets too scary. As you can see, there's 2 spades, and you know, there's an ace and a queen there, so a straight card might come off, a spade might come off, and if that happens, it'll kill your action. So I think the better play here is to raise. Let's see what Dovzhenko does. So he's just called, and look at this, a miracle card for 10. Now Dovzhenko's in bad shape with a set of 7s, and really it's going to be very difficult for him to fold now. And Tent's going to make a healthy bet, hoping to get raised now, obviously, because he's got the nuts. And this is the right play. Now you have the nuts, you've bet this flop, you have to bet the turn. Because if you check the turn, it's too likely that your opponent will check back a mediocre hand. But he probably will call if he has an ace. So you want to bet the turn with the straight. And also you want to protect against a possible flush draw. So in both cases, the aggressive play with the nuts was the right one. Dovzhenko here moves all in with the 7s, sees the bad news, he's up against a straight. But in this hand, I like the way Tent played the turn with his big hand, but I'm not so sure. I think that Dovzhenko played it right. I think in that case, he probably should have went ahead and raised the flop. Not a huge mistake, marginal, but every little mistake counts. So you always want to think about that when you have big hands as well. It's not just that simple. I've got a big hand, it doesn't matter what you do. It always matters what you do.
Never nice when you think you're about to scoop a big pot and then it all goes horribly wrong. It's all part of the game though, and bad beats do happen. But what do you do if you're on the receiving end of said bad beat?
Lows and highs are an important aspect of the game. If you want to be a successful player, you must learn how to manage this kind of feelings. Every time that you put your emotions at the table, every time that your emotion can affect your style of game, then probably you're not gonna do the right thing at that time.
Try to prepare yourself mentally that bad beats happens in this game. This is the part of the game.
Always really hard to get a bad beat, especially when it's really deep in a tournament, because I mean, as long as you're in a tournament, you really have to forget it as soon as possible and try to play your best game until the end. Yeah.
As long as you keep your head straight and focus and concentrate on your game and don't blow up, it all evens out in the end.
Learn to control your emotion, cut your high, manage your lows, and keep trying.
Time for a break now, but before we go, a question. Later on in the show, we'll be looking at the art of slow playing, and one of the most commonly slow played hands is a pair of aces. So our question is, on average, how often are you meant to be dealt a pair of aces? Is it A, once every 86 hands, B, once every 221 hands, or C, once every 464 hands? We'll give you the answer after the break. Welcome back to Everything Poker. Before the break, we asked you how often, statistically speaking, are you dealt a pair of aces? And the answer is B, every 221 hands. Having aces means having the nuts pre-flop, but what happens if you've got the nuts after the flop? Let's find out in the last of today's tutorials.
As we said in the previous tutorial, it's usually advisable to be aggressive when holding a very strong hand, but there are some situations that call for a slow play. It could be very risky, but if all the following conditions are met, it's definitely better to be deceptive and check your monster. Your hand needs to be strong enough to give away free cards. If you have the nuts or a monster hand, you're in a comfortable situation and you can afford to lay a trap. If you think your opponent will fold to a bet, you should check. The ultimate aim is to win as many chips as possible with your monster, so you want to keep them in the hand. By slow playing, you want to induce bluffs if your opponents catch up a little bit to get action. If the first two conditions are met and you think you might get action on later streets, go for the trap. Let them hang themselves.
I'm all in.
Now let's have a look at an example and see if the three conditions are met or not. Here an opponent raises pre-flop. You call with pocket eights on the button and the big blind calls. The flop gives you a full house. Sick. The big blind checks and the pre-flop raiser bets. Now you can either slow play by just calling or you could raise. Let's go through the three criteria. Your hand is definitely strong enough to slow play. You're holding a full house and your opponent can't have more than 2 outs. The flop probably missed both opponents. The big blind will likely fold no matter what you do. The pre-flop raiser probably has either 2 high cards, in which case he'll almost certainly fold if you raise, or an overpair where your aggression could scare him away. Overall, it's pretty likely that everybody folds if you get aggressive. If your opponent is holding overcards, he might make a big pair on the turn. If he has a pocket pair already, he probably thinks he's ahead and will often bet again. All three criteria are met, so it's definitely a good idea to slow play in this situation. Just call the flop bet and wait for your opponent to give you his chips. Let's take a look at another example. You raised pre-flop with your aces and got 3 callers. The flop is 8 of spades, 9 of spades, king of clubs. Let's go through the criteria again. Your hand is not strong enough to slow play. You have top pair, but your opponents could easily make a flush, straight, or 2 pair to beat you. It's unlikely that your opponent will fold to a bet. Someone might have either top pair or a decent draw to call with. If someone improves his hand to beat you, you'll probably get a ton of action, but that's definitely not what you want. Bottom line, bet the flop.
Recap. So now you should know when and when not to slow play a hand. Always go through the 3 criteria in your mind before you try a slow play. Is your hand strong enough to give away free cards? Will your opponents fold if you bet? And do you have a decent chance to get action if you slow play? If the answer is yes, go ahead and slow play. If it's a no, or if you're in doubt, just make the straightforward play and bet.
So we are now well into level 2, and you should be feeling more confident with your game. One man who saw his potential online and strived to achieve greatness is Randy Nananoku Liu. After making a slow start online, Randy started to see his game improve and was soon playing 24 tables at a time. After 4 million hands at 6-handed medium stakes tables, Randy had amassed more than $2 million in online winnings and over $500,000 more in bonuses from PokerStars for achieving Supernova Elite status, the ultimate accolade in the online world. He is renowned for being very hardworking and extremely consistent, with his results graph looking almost impossibly perfect. So make sure you watch out for the name Nenonoko and the face of Randy Lou. Off to Vegas now, where Daniel Negreanu is going to analyze a great hand from the NAPT, where one of the world's best players sets a perfect trap for his opponents, simply by slow playing his made hand. I love this one.
We play Texas Hold'em to flop the nuts. Flopping a full house is a dream, but the work is not done yet because you still have to figure out how to maximize value. One of the ways to do that is to set a trap for your opponents. This next hand we're gonna see, Tom Marchese does exactly that. Okay, so here, Tom Marchese has pocket tens, a really strong hand, and he's facing a raise of 135,000. He elects to call here, which I like a lot of the time, where some players might re-raise and try to get it on before the flop. Tom is gonna use position and maybe try to set a trap if he's lucky enough to flop a 10. So he goes ahead and makes the call, which will bring Sam Stein in the big blind to also call with 10-8 of diamonds. So a really good situation with pocket tens against 10-8 and 6-5. And there you have the miracle flop. You've got pocket tens, the flops come 10-3-3, and lucky for you, Sam Stein called and he's got a 10 as well. Not only that, Paredes also flopped the flush draw. So he's probably gonna get action here if he doesn't do anything too stupid by going all in or something ridiculous like that. Both players are gonna check over to Marchese, and this is a spot where you think, well, hey, you know what? I've got a full house, why not bet? But Tom is too smart for that. He knows that if he has all the tens locked up, it's unlikely that anyone has anything really that strong. So what he's gonna like to do here is just check, hoping that if someone has a hand like king-queen, they'll catch a queen or a king. If someone has pocket sevens, maybe they'll catch a 7. Whatever they have, he's gonna assume that they're drawing almost dead, that he can't lose this pot, so why not let them draw? In a lot of situations, you wanna protect your hand. But when you have a hand this strong, what are you worried about? There's nothing to protect. So what he's hoping for now is a really good action card. And the turn card does not disappoint. The 4 of diamonds improves both of his opponent's hands, but they still can't beat him. Now you see Sam Stein here with top pair and a flush draw. Not only that, Paredes has the flush draw that he flopped, also an open-ended straight draw. So both these guys think they've got a real chance. Little do they know, Marchese's sitting there with the nuts. He can't lose this pot. Sam, understandably, is gonna bet here with a top pair and a flush draw, feeling like he's got the best hand. No one bet the flop, no reason to be worried. With the big draw behind him, Paredes is of course gonna call, figuring he can catch a deuce, a 7, or a club. Now here's the interesting part about this hand. Tom Marchese can raise here, but I think he's trying to slow play it even further. He figures, you know what? If someone has a flush draw, hey, last I checked, a full house beats a flush, so why not let them make their flush? He doesn't want to move them off their hand. He wants to allow them to make the strongest possible hand they can, because he knows no matter what they catch, they're not gonna beat his hand. Beautifully played so far. He's getting maximum value. And this card should help him even more. A deuce on the river has helped Paredes. He's just made a straight. Of course, straight doesn't beat a full house, but strangely, Sam Stein is still gonna bet here with just his pair of 10s. He feels like it's the best hand, and he's gonna look for a little value. Now Paredes, he's just made a straight. No reason to think it's not good. He's gonna go ahead and make a raise. He's put in a little over $1 million, so just like that, Tom has gotten maximum action. A bet in front of him on the river, and a raise on the river as well, aside from the fact that he got a bet and a call on the turn, all this extra value just because he played it very slow on the flop. Of course, now he's gonna move it all in.
All in.
All in. So sick, yeah, 4s. That's so sick. Yeah, whatever it is.
And Paredes makes a good fold knowing, I know what's up. He was setting a trap. Having said that though, the trap worked perfectly because he still got the chips in on the river. So the real lesson here is when you flop something really, really big, don't be in a rush to get the chips in. Play it like Tom Marchese once in a while and wait for the river, and you might get even more chips doing it that way.
Well, that's just about your lot. If you want to watch the show again, recap previous episodes, or join the series at a more advanced level, then go to everythingpoker.com.
Well, another step closer towards learning everything you wanted to know about poker, but we're not there yet, so let's review what we've covered today. We analysed the different categories of made hand and explained how the strength of your hand should determine the way it's played. We looked at how you can trap your opponents in order to maximise your winnings, but we also looked at how, if you're not careful, you can end up trapping yourself. Plus, the bros gave us some words of wisdom to help us deal with those nasty bad beats.
To perfect all you have learned in the show today, go to PokerStars.com. Once on the site, this week's task is to play your made hands in accordance to the advice we learned in today's show. If your hand is strong enough, try trapping your opponent. If the board is dangerous, make sure you bet to protect your hand. This should help you steer clear of the bad beats.
Coming up in the next show, we study the different types of draws you'll find yourself holding and the factors which determine how they should be played. We'll cover one of the most important weapons to add to your arsenal, the semi-bluff. And we hear what it's like to take down a major title in your own backyard. And finally, we test the nerves of some icemen of the game. Or not. We'll see you next time.